Justin Frankel was 14 years old when most kids his age were worrying about homework, teachers, and weekend plans. He was spending his time writing software, not experimenting with little school projects, actually writing programs people wanted to use. Friends would describe conversations where Frankel mentioned an idea one day and showed a working version a few days later. That habit would eventually create one of the most influential applications in internet history. At the time, nobody thought a music player could become influential. Music players were boring. They sat in the background. Nobody bragged about them. Nobody built communities around them. Nobody imagined giant companies would spend hundreds of millions of dollars buying them. Then the internet collided with music. In the mid-1990s, a teenager discovering a new band usually had two options: listen to whatever local radio stations decided to play, or spend money on a CD. That was it. If you liked one song from a 15-track album, you bought all 15 tracks. The music industry loved that arrangement. Consumers tolerated it because there wasn't much alternative. Then MP3 compression arrived, and suddenly a song that previously occupied tens of megabytes could shrink to a fraction of its original size. Today, that sounds normal. Back then, it felt like somebody had discovered a loophole in reality. People started trading music online almost immediately. The process was painfully slow. Downloading a single song could take 40 minutes, sometimes longer. Sometimes you waited an hour and discovered the file was corrupted. Sometimes you thought you downloaded Nirvana and got a recording of somebody's garage band. None of that stopped anyone. Digital music felt too exciting. Frankel was watching all of this happen while building software. He understood something many larger companies missed. People weren't excited about file formats. They were excited about convenience. Getting music onto a computer was becoming easier. Actually listening to it still felt annoying. Existing software crashed, stuttered, froze, and buried simple functions under confusing menus. Frankel started building something better. The result was Winamp. The first version was tiny. Modern websites often load more data before you finish reading the headline than Winamp required to install. It launched quickly. It worked smoothly. It looked good. Most importantly, it respected the user's time. That sounds like a small detail until you remember how frustrating software often was during the 1990s. People noticed immediately. Downloads started climbing. Then they exploded. The internet was much smaller back then, which makes the numbers even crazier. Within a few years, Winamp reached millions of users. By the end of the decade, it had become one of the most downloaded applications on Earth. What's fascinating is how many people became attached to the player itself. They weren't just using Winamp. They were personalizing it. One website hosted thousands of custom skins. Another hosted thousands more. Some looked like futuristic command centers. Some looked like expensive stereo equipment. Some looked completely ridiculous. One resembled a toaster. Another looked like the dashboard of a sports car. Entire online communities appeared around creating and collecting these designs. There were users who spent more time browsing skins than listening to music. There were users with folders containing hundreds of skins, despite having only a few dozen songs. Winamp accidentally became one of the first examples of people customizing software as a form of self-expression. Then came the visualizers. If you've never seen them, imagine your computer transforming music into a psychedelic light show. Colors exploded across the screen. Shapes twisted and reacted to every beat. Some teenagers would turn off the lights in their bedrooms, put on headphones, and watch visualizers for hours. It sounds absurd now. Back then, it felt futuristic. The software was spreading almost entirely through word of mouth. No TikTok campaigns, no influencers, no recommendation algorithms. One roommate installed Winamp. 3 friends copied it. One of them burned it onto a CD full of useful software. Somebody uploaded it to a forum. Somebody mentioned it in an IRC chat room. The cycle repeated millions of times. By 1999, AOL was paying attention. This was the same AOL that had become synonymous with the Internet for millions of Americans. Its software arrived in mailboxes. Its logo appeared everywhere. It was one of the biggest names online. And it wanted Winamp. The deal was worth approximately $106 million. Frankel was only 25 years old. Think about that for a moment. A programmer who was still closer to his teenage years than middle age had built a product valuable enough to attract one of the largest internet companies in the world. Most founders spend decades chasing that outcome. Frankel reached it before turning 26. Yet the most interesting part of his story happened after the acquisition. Most entrepreneurs cash the check and disappear. Frankel did the opposite. While working under AOL, he became involved with a project called Nutella. The goal was ambitious: create a fully decentralized file-sharing network that couldn't be controlled from a central server. AOL immediately recognized the potential legal nightmare. According to multiple accounts, the company ordered the project shut down. The problem was timing. A version of the software had already escaped. Within days, developers around the world were copying the code, modifying it, and distributing it. AOL could stop its employees. It couldn't stop the internet. The network spread anyway. That episode tells you almost everything about Justin Frankel. He kept building things because they were interesting. Sometimes those projects became products. Sometimes they became movements. Sometimes they became headaches for billion-dollar corporations. Meanwhile, Winamp continued growing. Tens of millions of users installed it. At one point, it reportedly surpassed 25 million registered users, a staggering number in an era when many households were still connecting through dial-up modems. The future looked obvious. Digital music was growing. Winamp was growing. Internet adoption was growing. Then a small white device arrived from Apple. Its first version held roughly 1,000 songs. The company called it the iPod. Most people had never heard of it. Justin Frankel probably didn't realize it yet, but the next chapter of his story had already begun. When the AOL deal closed in 1999, Justin Frankel was 25 years old and worth more money than he could reasonably spend. Most founders dream about that moment for decades. Frankel got there before many people finish graduate school. If this were a typical Silicon Valley story, this would be the part where the founder buys a mansion, appears on magazine covers, and starts giving interviews about entrepreneurship. Justin Frankel did something much stranger. He went back to programming. People who worked with him often tell the same story. Money never seemed to change his behavior very much. He still spent absurd amounts of time building software. He still jumped from project to project whenever something caught his attention. He still looked more like a programmer than a corporate executive. That became a problem almost immediately because AOL had just spent $106 million acquiring a company built by people who hated moving slowly. The culture clash was obvious. Nullsoft moved fast. AOL was becoming a giant corporation. Nullsoft liked experimentation. AOL liked meetings. Nullsoft liked shipping products. AOL liked approval processes. Frankel wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed asking for permission. One story captures the situation perfectly. Only months after AOL acquired Nullsoft, Frankel and a small group of developers started working on a new project. It wasn't another music player. It wasn't even related to Winamp. The project was called Nutella. Today, the name doesn't mean much to most people. In 2000, it was explosive. Napster was dominating headlines at the time because millions of people were sharing music through a centralized system. The weakness was obvious. Shut down the central servers and the network dies. Nutella approached the problem differently. No central server, no headquarters, no single machine controlling the network. Users connected directly to one another. It was one of the earliest large-scale peer-to-peer systems ever created. The idea was so radical that AOL reportedly ordered the project shut down almost immediately. The problem was that the internet had already seen it. A beta version escaped online. Within days, developers around the world were copying the code. By the time AOL tried closing the door, thousands of people were already inside. Frankel had accidentally helped launch a technology that could no longer be controlled by the company that employed him. Imagine spending $106 million to acquire a programmer and then discovering he had released one of the most disruptive file-sharing technologies on the internet. That's roughly what AOL experienced. Most people would have learned a lesson from that episode. Frankel didn't seem interested in learning that particular lesson. He kept building. While executives worried about lawsuits and strategy, he moved on to new ideas. One of them would eventually become one of the strangest forgotten success stories of the early internet. Its name was Smarter Child. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Yet millions of people used it. In the early 2000s, teenagers would come home from school, log into AOL Instant Messenger, and start chatting with what was essentially a robot. They asked it questions. They played games with it. They requested sports scores, movie information, and weather forecasts. Some users spent hours talking to it. Others treated it like a digital friend. Many became annoyed when its answers weren't good enough. Sound familiar? 2 decades before ChatGPT, people were already arguing with software because it didn't understand them properly. At its peak, Smarter Child handled millions of conversations. Journalists covering artificial intelligence years later would describe it as one of the earliest mainstream chatbots. Most people remember Siri. Most remember Alexa. Very few remember the chatbot. Millions of teenagers were already talking to years before either existed. Frankel wasn't trying to predict the future. He simply liked building interesting things. That's a theme that keeps appearing throughout his career. The same thing happened with video. Long before YouTube became one of the most visited websites in history, Frankel was experimenting with online video distribution. One of his projects, NSV, aimed to make internet video streaming practical at a time when many users still struggled to load basic websites quickly. The timing was almost comically early. Broadband adoption was limited. Streaming technology was primitive. Most people were still thinking about music downloads, not internet video. Yet Frankel was already exploring a future that wouldn't fully arrive for years. This happened repeatedly. He would become interested in a problem, start building a solution, and then move on before the rest of the world caught up. Meanwhile, Winamp continued growing. Millions of users still loved it. New skins appeared every day. New plugins appeared every week. Entire communities remained dedicated to customizing every aspect of the software. One website hosted tens of thousands of downloadable skins. Some users accumulated collections so large they needed folders just to organize other folders. It sounds ridiculous until you remember that people were treating Winamp less like software and more like a personal space. Years before social media profiles became digital identities, Winamp was already giving users a way to customize how technology looked and felt. Yet something unusual was happening inside Frankel's career. Most entrepreneurs spend years defending a single success. Frankel kept wandering into entirely new industries: music players, file sharing, chatbots, streaming technology. Each project could have become a full-time career on its own. Somehow, he treated them almost like side quests. Then he did it again. In 2005, he started working on a new audio application called Reaper. The software entered a market dominated by products costing hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Industry veterans largely ignored it at first. That turned out to be a mistake. Reaper was fast, lightweight, and surprisingly powerful. Musicians started recommending it. Audio engineers started recommending it. Producers started recommending it. The same pattern that had helped Winamp spread across the internet began appearing again. People discovered it and told other people. Over time, Reaper became one of the most respected digital audio workstations in the world. Looking back at Frankel's career, the most surprising thing isn't that he created Winamp. The surprising thing is how many times he managed to build something influential. Most programmers spend their entire lives hoping to create one product that matters. Frankel somehow ended up attached to Winamp, Nutella, Smarter Child, and Reaper, 4 projects that each left a permanent mark on internet culture. By the late 2000s, the technology industry was changing rapidly. Facebook was growing, YouTube was exploding, smartphones were beginning to reshape everyday life. Yet Justin Frankel remained what he had always been: a programmer sitting in front of a computer, building things because they seemed interesting. The millions of Winamp users knew his name because of music. The strange reality was that Winamp turned out to be only one chapter in a much larger story. By the late 2000s, the internet barely resembled the place where Winamp had become famous. MP3 collections were disappearing. Streaming was taking over. New users were carrying thousands of songs in their pockets without ever seeing a file extension. The companies dominating technology headlines were different. The trends were different. The rules were different. Justin Frankel was still writing software. That's probably the strangest detail in this entire story. OOL spent $106 million buying Winamp. Winamp became one of the most recognizable pieces of software on the internet. Nutella helped shape the future of peer-to-peer networks. Smarter Child gave millions of people their first experience talking to a machine years before Siri, Alexa, or ChatGPT existed. Reaper became one of the most respected audio production tools in the world. Most people would be satisfied having their name attached to one of those things. Frankel somehow ended up attached to all 4. Yet if you stopped random people on the street and asked who Justin Frankel was, most would have no idea. They might recognize Winamp. They might remember Napster. Some musicians would know Reaper. Almost nobody would connect those stories to the same person. That's what makes his career feel so unusual. The products became famous. The creator mostly didn't. Somewhere, right now, there is probably a copy of Reaper running in a recording studio. Somewhere else, a developer is reading about Nutella while studying the history of decentralized networks. Someone is watching a video about early chatbots without realizing one of the first major examples was connected to the same programmer who built Winamp. Those threads keep leading back to the same place. Not to a billionaire celebrity founder, not to a tech icon giving keynote presentations, just a programmer who liked building things. A programmer who kept stumbling into the future, often years before everyone else arrived there. And that's where the story circles back to the image most people never saw. Not the acquisition, not the headlines, not the millions of downloads. A guy sitting in front of a computer, chasing another idea because it seemed interesting. The software changed, the industries changed, the internet changed. That part never really did. And maybe that's why Winamp still matters. Not because it won, it didn't. Not because it became the future, it didn't. Winamp matters because it was created by someone who spent decades quietly shaping pieces of the future anyway. Long after the music player disappeared from most computers, the fingerprints of the person who built it never really disappeared at all.